Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey My Mother's Son podcast. I'm joined with Jeff Butorac. He's a former Division I tennis player, then went on to coach tennis and basketball, tennis at the high school level, basketball at the high school and collegiate level. And he is now the founder of Inner Rival and the author of a book by the same title, Inner Rival, as well. Jeff, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
You bet. So before we get started, though, just introduce yourself in your own words. Who is Jeff today?
Absolutely. So right now, I currently have two jobs. I am working full-time with my family's tennis club in Rochester. So I teach tennis every day to all levels, old and young. And then I also work full-time with athletes as far as the mental side of sports, working on how to become a little bit mentally tougher with maybe dealing with their self-talk or nervousness or anxiety, different issues that they may have mentally with how they're performing. And so I work with them either one-on-one or with multiple teams, and just sort of how we can improve that sort of side of our athletics to not only become better in sports, but also just become a little bit stronger mentally in life.
Yeah, I love that. And, obviously with my coaching background before we started traveling full time in the RV, it's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the show is just kind of that, similarity there between coaching, but then also, as I said before we started recording, this is probably my third or fourth show that I've talked about just, mental wellness for athletes, something that, years ago was totally, not talked about and now is, starting to, have some more light shed on it. But you yourself actually got out of coaching because of anxiety issues that you dealt with yourself. So tell me a little bit about that journey, and then what led you to want to help others who are kind of battling those same inner rivals.
Right. Well, so there wasn't one thing that happened that created all this. It was sort of a slow growth process over the course of 4 to 5 years or so. And I didn't really notice it per se until near the end when it got really, really bad. It was one of those things where I always just kind of kept figuring, hey, you can work through this. It's going to get better, whatever the issue might have been at that time. It was sort of the mindset of just keep pushing, keep working, and keep pushing. And that's ultimately what I kind of think drove me to dealing with the anxiety and panic attacks and that sort of thing. Was I just pushed myself almost into obsession with trying to get better. And then I started caring so much about what other people thought. I became very critical of myself if things didn't go perfectly or we didn't get the win. It was all my fault. What can I do differently? How can I improve? And it's good to think that way to a degree, but I was pushing myself way past that good to the point where it got out of control. And so again, like I said, it was sort of a thing that just slowly grew with my thinking, the way I thought, the way I spoke to myself. It just wasn't healthy. It wasn't productive. And the reason I got into wanting to work with other athletes, coaches, performers was because it was very obvious to me that there's no way I was the only one dealing with this kind of stuff. And if it is going to take me out of something like coaching basketball that I loved so much, I could do that to anybody. So I knew I wanted to stay in the world of working with athletes. I knew I wanted to work with basketball players and try to find a way to at least remain in that world, even if I wasn't going to be coaching basketball. And this was just a way that I saw would be great. It did wonders for me and the way I live my life and the way I just kind of go about things on a daily basis, that I figured, all right, if this is helping me, it's got to be able to help other people. I just got to figure out how to go about doing that. And it's just turned into what it is today with me writing a book and starting a business, working with athletes and teams and musicians and all that sort of thing, where it is becoming more and more obvious, I think, to society that this is not just for athletes, that it's something that pretty much anybody has to deal with on a daily basis. So that's sort of how I got into it, the ins and outs of the anxiety and the panic attack that I dealt with. And to be honest, I still deal with things today. It will never go away completely. It'll constantly be something that I have to do self-checks in, making sure I'm being aware with how I'm speaking to myself, how I'm thinking about things that are going on around me or how things might affect me. and then how I'm going to respond to that. And so it's one of those things, you're never perfect at it. You're never, I'm going to be great forever. It's just a constant battle. And I think that's one that everybody fights on a daily basis and will continue to fight.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. It is definitely something that I think we all battle at different stages throughout our life, and obviously sometimes worse than others, but nonetheless, it is really that inner voice that's kind of, what type of self-talk are we participating in?
Yeah.
We are
And
definitely our own worst critic.
Absolutely. And it's funny. So in the research of this book, the reason we are so self-critical is because it's built into our DNA. It's built that way from we have to pay attention to the negative in order to survive. And that was built into us from, the first man walking around is we have to be careful of the weather, our environment, animals around us. How are we going to find food? All these different things where we had to view them in a negative lens first to survive. And then we could look at the positive. And that's sort of still built in us. And so it's actually natural for us to view anything through a negative lens first. And then we have the ability to choose what we think about. So I can say, hey, I look at this situation that looks negative. Wait a second. I don't think that. I can turn it around and now I can find a way to look at it positively. So for me, that was sort of a big aha moment and almost a relief of, hey, I'm not a negative person. I'm not somebody that it's built into me. Everybody's this way. Okay, so now I can figure out how to grow past that. So for me, that was a big relief. Like, hey, I'm not just a negative person. This is everybody. This is how we all are, right? To varying degrees. But again, I don't want to be ostracized from a group because if I did back when we were, living in a village, now I'm going to be, in the environment by myself where I don't want to upset people around me because it's that same sort of feeling of, oh, I'm being ostracized. I'm on my own. Even though it's maybe not to the detriment of our survival, we still have those natural feelings that we want to people please, make people happy around us. We don't like when somebody's mad at us. And that's just all from the history of man.
And it really does come down to kind of checking yourself and making that choice to look at a situation differently.
Absolutely.
Bad stuff happens all the time. It's just a matter of understanding that it probably could have been much worse than what it was. There's always a silver lining.
Absolutely.
The way I've slowly started to look at things as I've aged. Certainly wasn't always like that by any stretch.
No, we're definitely not. I agree. And
yeah,
it's one of those things that I think you have to force yourself to do it to a degree.
Yes.
We are so, it's almost the white noise in our head, right? Where sometimes we become so unaware that what we're saying or that we're being negative, sort of, we're on autopilot, that we have to take time to sit and reflect and become aware of what we're saying to ourselves. And that's not easy to do, especially in a society that we're in today where everyone is go, go, go. If you're not running errands, you're at an event. If you're not there, you're on your phone. If you're not there, you're on your computer or you're at work and you're always running and going. You don't have this quiet time that we, had so many decades ago. And so we get in this autopilot thinking, we're not aware of what's going on, and then it just goes downhill. It's tough, but taking that time, like you said, over the years to think about it and become aware of what you're saying, then you can start to kind of change it. But it's tough in today's society with just how fast and chaotic everything is.
Yeah, no doubt. And like I said at the beginning of the show, this is a subject that, for years and years was really taboo.
Sure.
In society in general, but I think probably even more so in sports.
Sure.
Because like I said, when, back in the 70s and stuff, when I grew up, it was always like, hey, just suck it up, power through it, that sort of thing.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Where, that's really, I think one of the hurdles that the athletic world has had to overcome is really kind of getting, over that, quote unquote mental toughness.
Right.
And just really understanding that your mental well-being is as important, if not more important, probably more important than your physical well-being. I mean, as athletes, constantly training to make sure the physical side of their game is, performing as best it can be. And
Right.
if the mental side isn't there though, like it's just completely out of balance. So, you know, I think there's been some high profile athletes who have started to bring this to the forefront.
Yep.
Simone Biles always comes to, first to mind for me because,
Yes.
on the biggest stage of the world, you know, she needed to take a step back. And, how important do you think that is, that some of these higher profile athletes have said, hold on, we, at the end of the day, we're all still human beings, regardless of
Yep.
this, this freak of nature, physical, athletic talent that we have. We're still a human being, as hard as it is
Yeah.
for the rest of us to believe that.
Right. Well, if you look at the kind of evolution of sports, and I kind of have looked at this over the last maybe 25 years or so. And if you look at it, where weightlifting became really popular with pro athletes, roughly around the time that Michael Jordan was in the NBA. That's when those guys really started hitting the weights. And then became the popularity of nutrition. Now everybody has a nutritionist to make sure they eat healthy. And then became the of all the making sure you're warming up correctly, you're cooling down, you're stretching, all sort of the stuff where you take care of your body. And I think the mental side is sort of the next frontier for all these pro athletes. And if you look at the way all this stuff has evolved over the years, it starts at the professional level and then it trickles down to the high school and youth level, right? So, when I was in high school, we didn't really have a weightlifting program. And I graduated high school in 2003. Now every single high school team has their own weightlifting, like personal trainer. They have weight programs. Every kid's lifting weights from 6th, 7th, 8th grade on. So it sort of grows, right, as whatever the athletes do, it trickles down. So if you watch, I watch a lot of NBA. You see a lot of clips of guys doing meditation, breathing on the bench. You hear guys talking about anxiety that they might have. Every team has sports psychologists on staff now. And it's even building into the Division I level. Me being in Minnesota, I know the U of M has a sports psychology team that they work with. So I think it's only a matter of a couple of years that where high schools start having this, the youth start having this. So it sort of starts at the NBA or the highest level of whatever sports are, trickles down because they see how important it is up at that level, right? I mean, yes, they may be playing in a little bit more of an intense arena, right? You're playing in front of 17,000 people versus on a high school court, but it doesn't feel any different to those high schoolers, right? It's one of those things where whatever venue you're used to is what you're used to. So these guys that are doing all these different things and make sure they're not only dealing with anxiety and negativity, but they're mentally putting themselves in the best place to perform. So it's not just about being not nervous. It's about being maybe more focused, being able to let go of mistakes quicker and just move on to the next thing, especially in a sport like basketball or hockey where things happen so quickly. They're learning that you can train yourself mentally to become better at these things. If you look at NBA players again, there was a study where they tracked free throws through a number of seasons, and then they looked at how many they missed during a game versus how many they missed in the last 2 minutes of a game in crucial games. And amongst all players, it was roughly they made 7 or 8% less free throws in those clutch minutes than they did throughout the rest of the game. And that's all mental. There's nothing that changes about the free throw. You're standing in the exact same spot. No one's in front of you. If you're missing 8% more in that time, that's 100% mental. So these guys are now learning how important this mental side is to their sports. And it'll be interesting to see what it grows into at that high school level once, younger people start to build this in at an earlier age, and then see how it grows and develops for, because this wasn't anything that any of us talked about when I was in high school. The how to work on your breathing, how to work on your self-talk. That wasn't even, like you said, we all do private workouts and we have special coaches and all these kinds of things for our skills. It's now what do we do mentally? And it's going to be interesting to see how that is shaped at that age.
Yeah, it definitely will be interesting to see how it evolves. But you're absolutely right, where it does, we've kind of gone through those phases. Because again, even when you look back in the 70s and stuff, again, I'm a baseball guy, so that's what I always resort to. You see a big leaguer hit a home run and come in and smoke a cigarette in the dugout.
Yeah.
So
Times
it's
were a
like,
little different.
it's just, yeah. So, like you said, just watching their diets and all that stuff, it's evolved. So I
Yeah,
like how you phrase that. This is kind of the next frontier of sports, is to really address that mental
I think
side.
so. They're all looking for the next edge, right? My brother was a
Right.
professional tennis player, and through his years of playing pro tennis, he was always, hey, what can I change about me or my game to kind of get that next one up on guys? It's your diet. There's only so many physical things you can do. All right. So that next frontier is now that mental side. And there are people that are diving in head first. I mean, there's a number of, again, I follow the NBA, a number of NBA guys who are openly working with sports psychologists on a, like daily basis to improve these sort of things. So it'll be fun to see how it evolves over the years.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely will be for sure. So, you know, what are some of the things that you've found with working with, some of the people that you work with? Like, what are the biggest hurdles that, they're looking to get over,
Yeah.
and how are you helping them get over those hurdles?
Well, for a lot of people, there's self-talk, right? And that's what it was, a big thing for me. So when I played high school tennis, tennis is a game of mistakes, right? You're not going to play a perfect tennis match. You're not. It's everybody's making mistakes constantly, and I was so hard on myself when I was throwing all kinds of foul language directed to myself, right? You're terrible. What are you thinking? How can you make that mistake? Well, if you do that enough, man, you're going to feel pretty bad about yourself. And I've worked with a number of athletes who are just so brutal to themselves. And I was too. And it's one of those things you think about, like, hey, if anybody's going to be nice to you, it should be you, right? Like, I mean, and the thing was, I didn't realize that I could choose what I said to myself, right? So when I first dealt with all my anxiety and panic, I went to see a therapist for a little while. And the big aha moment that I got from him was, you get to choose what you think about. We have that choice. And I thought, wait, I don't have to just be mean to myself constantly. It's not just. So I had that autopilot going for years and years and years until I said, oh, I can choose to think about this. And now I catch myself constantly thinking about something that might go on in a negative way and just, oh, no, don't, especially with traffic, right? I could be a traffic road rage guy, but now I'm catching myself, hey, no, there's nothing you can do about it right now. Just let it be. But it's that awareness of what you're saying to yourself. And so many people are just unaware of what goes on in their head. So that self-talk, and one of the things that I think is best for becoming aware of what you're saying is just doing a little bit of meditation. If you do a couple minutes of meditation a day for a few weeks, even, you'll start to just become more aware of what's going on between the ears. And, with the athletes that I work with, that's one of the biggest things that we tackle first. Hey, what are you saying to yourself? And often I go, well, I don't know. All right, you gotta figure that out. And once they figured that out, they're like, oh man, I didn't realize I was being so negative, or I didn't realize I was constantly saying this. So that's one of them. And another one with athletes, and I think this is common across a lot of disciplines, especially with people that want to be very proficient at whatever it is, and that's dealing with perfectionism, right? Whether they want to be perfect to make themselves happy, they want to be perfect to make their coaches happy, their parents happy, whatever it is, but just expecting everything to go perfectly all the time. And then when it doesn't, they just, well, I'm terrible. It didn't go exactly the way I thought. In tennis, it doesn't work that. You're going to lose, 25 to 40% of your points, even if you win the match. And so if you're expecting to go out there and just win every point and then get mad at yourself when you don't win every point, that's just unrealistic expectations of perfectionism. So there's obviously a number of different things, but those are two that I almost have to touch base with every person to some degree. It's good as an athlete to deal with some perfectionism, because that's how you become great, is you want it to be perfect. But when it turns into, and that's kind of what I dealt with too, is I tried to be a perfect basketball coach, and that's just not realistic. And then when it didn't go perfect, I beat myself up. So we just got to be able to be okay with trying your hardest. And then if it doesn't work out, how can we improve it? And if you can kind of go with that mindset rather than I have to be perfect, you're going to tend to be a little bit easier on yourself, which is perfectly okay, even though a lot of us athletes don't do that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it comes down to the fact that, you can't control what happens to you, but you can control how you react to it. And
Exactly.
that's really kind of the key approach that, I think we need to take on the mental side of things for sure.
I think you're exactly right. In this process of me kind of building this business, I really got into stoicism especially from an author named Ryan Holiday. He writes very eloquently in a way that I could understand it. And that's exactly sort of the overall idea was stoicism was we can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond to that. And where that becomes difficult for most people is when emotions get involved, right? It's so often when you're giving advice to a friend or family member or something to look at things rationally, be like, hey, why aren't you just doing it this way? This makes so much more sense. While when your emotions are caught up in it, doesn't make that much sense, right? So, one of the things I talk about in my book is the difference between being reactionary and being able to respond. If you react, it's emotional, it's quick, it's not thought out. If you respond, even if it's a very quick response, you've thought it out, you are doing it intentionally. So there's a difference between reacting and responding. And if we can respond more often, I think we find ourselves in better situations. Reactionary is when we get into a fight with a friend or we say something we didn't mean and now we got to take it back. If we respond to an event, we're probably more, okay, this is what I want to say. This is what I mean to say. This is what I really believe. So, like I said, meditation, I think kind of helps with that a little bit, the reaction versus response. But it's not easy because often it's emotionally charged and emotions are not an easy thing to work through all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, no doubt about that. So let's talk a little bit about the book. I know,
Sure.
this whole thing led you to start the business, but then what was it that inspired you to write the book? And I guess which came first, the book or the business? Are we going to write the book and start the business, or I started the business and then I wrote the book?
I would kind of say the business idea came first, right? I knew I wanted to work with these athletes. I knew I had this concept in mind, but how am I going to get it out there? How am I going to get people to listen to me, to hire me, to work with me? And I didn't, I hadn't climbed Mount Everest. I hadn't swam across the English Channel or won an NBA title or, whatever these huge things that people that write books about do. So I had to, or that have these speaking businesses do. So I had to figure out how to get my knowledge out there so people could check it out and then bring me on. And writing a book was just something that came natural just because I love reading. When I was a coach, I read hundreds of books about coaches, about coaching, leadership, communication, all those kinds of things. Anything that a coach would need to know, I tried to read it. I'll read an article, watch a video, whatever I could. And again, that's part of what drove me into that anxiety. I did the same thing with mental toughness. As soon as I quit coaching, I found every self-help book I could find, every book on confidence, every book on, special forces in the military, ultra marathon runners, just these people that had these unbelievable mindsets or had achieved these things. And I thought, okay, there's something to all of this stuff. And so as I went through it, I started to kind of match up all these different things out of different books and articles and videos and whatnot. And I saw this, the inner rival. They all kind of talk about this negative voice that we have to deal with. And I thought, all right, so how are we going to get rid of that voice? And so that's sort of the idea behind the book is it's my story at the beginning, but then it's 10 chapters of what I tried to use as much scientific proof as possible. If there wasn't scientific evidence for it, I tried to use examples from people or from my life and show how these things can quiet that negative voice in your head. It's never going to go away. It's always going to be there, but we have ways to weaken it, to make it quieter, to hear it, but then ignore it, rather than just let it beat in your ears all day. So that was sort of the idea behind the book. And then now I'm really trying to push this business of working with these athletes and teams. And it's been fun working in a way that I hadn't been before. Everything was skill based with me as a coach, and now everything is mental based. And it's a lot of fun, sort of being in this world that I kind of helped create and work with a little bit. So, which one came first? Kind of at the same time, but yeah, that's sort of the overall idea behind the book.
Yeah. It shows that you never really did stop coaching. You might not be coaching on the court now,
Yes,
but you are still coaching in a different capacity for sure. So I love that.
exactly, exactly.
So Jeff, we could go on and talk for
Absolutely.
hours, I'm sure, but we do have time limits on the podcast and all that sort of stuff. So is there anything that you think we missed that you think would be important to the listeners?
You know, if I have an overall kind of idea about all this stuff, it's that you have the choice of what you think, right? It's you if you have these negative voices in your head or you're thinking things about negativity, you have the choice if you get to do that or not, right? So one little fable I'll share with you real quick, and it's in the book. And again, I sort of had these three aha moments, and one of them was when the therapist that I work with explained to me I get to choose what I think about. The other one was understanding that it's natural to be negative. That's built in our DNA. And then the third one was this Native American fable that I read. It's real short, but it goes, there's a Native American grandfather and grandson sitting by the fire, and the grandfather leans over to the grandson and says, "We have two wolves that live inside of us. One of them is negative, full of envy and fear and jealousy, and one is positive, filled with joy and hope and empathy." And the grandson asks, "Well, which wolf will win?" And the grandfather says, "The one that you feed." And to me, that was one of those, oh, okay,
Yeah.
this makes a lot of sense, where the more positivity I build into myself, the more positive I'm going to generally be. The more negativity I build, the more negative I'm going to be. So you have the choice of how positive you want to be, and positive doesn't mean happy-go-lucky all the time. It's just having a constructive mindset, right? You're going to have bad days. You're going to have bad moments, but how quickly can we get past them? How can we find a way to turn that thinking into a productive thought rather than something that's just going to make me feel worse? Easier said than done. It's
Yeah.
much easier said than done, but it works. I mean, I'm proof that it works, because my life has been turned around over the last few years since I went through all that to where I am now. I feel like a completely different person. So, yeah, it's up to everybody else how they want to go about doing it, though.
It's cool. And I love the story of the two wolves. I've seen that before, and it is very powerful. It is definitely very
It's just so true. That's
Yep.
it's a simple story, but it's just so true.
Yeah.
And that's what I really like about it.
Yeah. Very cool. So Jeff, how do people reach out to you if they want to work with you, or where can they get the book? How can they find Jeff on the internet?
Absolutely. So the book is on Amazon under Inner Rival. You can also go to my website, which is inner-rival.com. It's inner-rival.com. And my book is on there. You can reach out to me on there. I'm on all the social medias, Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, all those things. Just look for Inner Rival and you'll find me there. But I'm happy to work with anybody. It doesn't just have to be athletes. I have some musicians that I've worked with in the past. I got a plan to work with a few other corporations coming up. So I'm happy to work with anybody. It doesn't just have to be athletes.
Cool. Love it. All right. Well, that brings us to our final question then, Jeff. As you know, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places. And that comes from the opening lyrics of a Michael Franti song, Gloria, which go, "When many little people in many little places do many little things, then the whole world changes." So it's one of the little things that Jeff does on a daily basis to make the world a little bit better place.
I like to think that my job is a part of that, especially as a tennis instructor. We get so many people that is their enjoyment or their fun for that day. A lot of times we'll get people that have maybe never played sports. This is their first time, something brand new. And just getting to be the one that kind of showed them have a good time doing this. If I love when we have a person that never played before, and then 5 years from now, they're, a high level player. They're absolutely loving it. It's become a big part of their life. So I think just getting to do that kind of stuff on a daily basis and just help people to enjoy their day, that's a big thing for me.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And again, as a former coach, I completely understand that. It's so much bigger than the game itself.
Right.
It's really about those connections and be able to see those individuals grow. And that's been one of the biggest blessings that Sandy and I have had with traveling throughout the country. Is I've got players that are literally scattered everywhere, and
Sure.
being able to reconnect with them, 10, 15, 20, 25 years after I coached them, and see what they're doing in the world now is incredible. So it's so much more than tennis. It's so much more than baseball or basketball or whatever the case is. And, unless you're a coach or a teacher, I think coaches and teachers are very similar in that aspect where they can really touch those lives. So I love that answer, and it really resonates with me. So
yeah, I mean, when it's you mentioned that with former players, my first coaching job ever was at the University of Wisconsin Eau Claire, and fast forward 10 years later, I'm a head high school basketball coach coaching against one of my former players at UW Eau Claire. I had no idea he was coaching that team. I just showed up at the gym. There he is. He's one of the assistants on staff. So it's a lot of fun when you just kind of run into random connections like that.
Yeah, it is. It definitely is. Very cool. Very cool. Jeff, I really appreciate the time. It was a great conversation. I'm sure the listeners are going to get a lot out of it. For those out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com. While there, feel free to pick up a copy of one of my books. And again, Jeff, thank you so much for the time. It's a great conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
You bet.